Hello friends, welcome to Books Goldmine. Today we're talking about a book called Detox Your Ego by Steven Sylvester. Here's a strong hypothesis this book opens with. The harder you chase winning for yourself, the more it quietly works against you. Not your skill, not your preparation. The thing sabotaging you is what you're telling yourself in the 60 seconds before it matters most. Think about how often we see this play out. An athlete with the game won somehow loses it in the last 30 seconds. A candidate who nailed every mock interview freezes the moment the real panel walks in. We call it choking, and we treat it like a mystery. It isn't. It's an operating system problem, and once you understand it, you start seeing it everywhere in yourself included. Steven Sylvester spent his career studying this exact moment. He was a professional cricketer who could look brilliant one week and fall apart the next. Same skills, same body, wildly different results. That contradiction sent him on a 20-year journey working as a psychologist with world champions across sport and business, trying to answer one question. Why do some people perform freely under pressure while others, just as talented, tighten up and collapse? His answer wasn't about talent. It was about ego, not arrogance, but something quieter and more dangerous. The running commentary in your head about whether you're winning or losing, whether you're good enough, whether you'll be accepted or rejected. He built a framework around it, tested it with elite athletes and business leaders over 2 decades, and distilled it into 7 steps. He called it leadership without ego. In this video, we're going deep into what that framework actually says, why it works, and how you can start using it. Because whether you're stepping into a boardroom, a stage, an exam hall, or just your own daily grind, the thing quietly running the show in your head might be working against you without you ever noticing. Let's get into it. If you're enjoying breakdowns like this, subscribe to Books Goldmine so you don't miss the next one. Now back to the book. Here's the first idea, and it's the one that reframes everything else. We treat winning as the obvious, unquestionable goal. Nobody stops to ask why winning matters so much, or what it's actually doing to us psychologically. Sylvester argues that's exactly the question we need to ask, because the pursuit of winning, specifically winning for yourself, carries a hidden cost most people never trace back to its source. Think about how we're wired to react to winning and losing starting from childhood. Winners get praised, elevated, put on pedestals. Losers get quietly filed away and forgotten. From the school sports day to the university admissions letter to the first promotion at work, we absorb the lesson early. Our worth is tied to which category we land in. So winning stops being just an outcome. It becomes a defense mechanism. It becomes proof that we're good enough and that we won't be rejected, which, according to Sylvester, are the 2 deepest fears sitting underneath almost all of our ego-driven behavior. Not good enough. Rejected by others. Nearly every anxious, self-protective, overly cautious, or overly aggressive thing we do under pressure traces back to one of those 2 fears trying to defend itself. Here's the twist, though. Chasing wins to silence those fears doesn't actually work. It just keeps the fear alive, because now every single performance becomes a referendum on your worth as a person. You're not just trying to do the job well anymore, you're trying to prove something about yourself. And the moment performance turns into self-proof, you lose access to the very freedom and looseness that peak performance actually requires. Sylvester's own career became the case study that started this whole line of research. Early on in a lower-stakes match, he played with total freedom, nothing to prove, nothing riding on the outcome except the pure joy of playing the game he loved. He excelled. It was loose, instinctive, alive. Weeks later, in a much higher-stakes debut, everything was suddenly on the line. He needed to prove himself, needed to justify the opportunity, needed to show he belonged. And he fell apart. Same skill set, same body, same technique. Completely different result. The only variable that changed was what he was telling himself about what winning meant in that moment. This is worth sitting with because most performance advice gets this backwards. We're told that pressure reveals character, that champions want the ball in the final seconds, that wanting it badly enough is the difference maker. Sylvester's 2 decades of consulting work with elite performers tells a different story. Wanting it too much in the wrong way is often exactly what breaks you. The want itself isn't the problem. What you're wanting, proof of your own worth, versus the chance to contribute something real, is the entire hinge point. And this isn't just a sports phenomenon. Think about the last time you walked into a room needing to be liked, needing to be seen as competent, needing the outcome to go a certain way to feel okay about yourself. Compare that to a time you walked into a room simply focused on doing good work, genuinely curious about the problem, unattached to what people would think of you afterward. Same room, same stakes on paper, completely different internal weather. That difference is the entire subject of this book. If winning for yourself is the trap, what's the alternative? Sylvester's answer is almost the opposite of what most self-help advice tells you. Instead of turning inward and building more self-belief, more self-focus, more "you've got this," the fix is to widen the lens outward. Shift from winning for yourself to winning for something bigger than yourself. A team, a community, a cause, a purpose beyond your own personal record. He illustrates this through elite athletes who seem to operate on an entirely different psychological plane under pressure. People who could carry the weight of an entire community's hopes into a match and somehow perform better because of it, not worse. On paper, that should be the opposite of what happens. More people watching, more expectation, more at stake. That should mean more pressure, more fear, more chance of collapse. But Sylvester's observation, backed by years of direct access to these performers, was that the common thread wasn't fearlessness or an unusually thick skin. It was that their sense of purpose was pointed outward rather than inward. When you're playing for your team, your community, the people who believe in you, the people you represent, the stakes are still enormous, arguably larger, but the pressure itself transforms in character. It's no longer, "Am I good enough?" It's, "How can I contribute right now in this moment to something that matters beyond me?" That subtle shift changes your entire relationship with fear, because fear of personal failure and fear of letting down a cause you love don't feel the same in the body, and they don't produce the same physiology. This matters far beyond sport, and it's worth translating directly into whatever your version of the big moment actually is. Think about the last time you did something not for personal credit, but because it genuinely served someone else, helped a colleague solve a problem with no attribution attached, showed up for a friend at real personal cost, worked late on something that would never have your name on it. Notice how different that felt from doing something purely to prove yourself, even if the effort involved was identical. Same output, completely different emotional weather system running underneath it. Sylvester's argument is that this isn't just a nicer way to feel, it's functionally superior for actual performance. Selfishness narrows your attention onto threat. Will I be judged? Will I fail? Will this go wrong? That narrowed, threat-focused attention is precisely what produces tight, hesitant, over-controlled movement and thinking. Purpose beyond yourself widens attention back out onto the task and the people you're serving, which is where fluency and flow actually come from. In other words, the selfless approach isn't just morally nicer. It's the more effective one, and that's the counterintuitive part worth remembering. Sylvester built a working model out of all this, based on decades of consulting work across sport and business. It maps two deepest fears, not being good enough, and being rejected by others, against two deepest sources of joy, feeling fully competent and feeling genuinely accepted. Your ego in his model is constantly running calculations to protect you from the fears and steer you toward the joy. The problem is that most of us never examine how this calculation actually works. It happens, in his words, at millisecond speed, entirely below conscious awareness, driving behavior we don't even realize is ego-driven until we're taught to look for it. To bring this into consciousness, he built a simple three-part process he calls the ABC plan, borrowed loosely from first aid language, because the analogy is deliberately visceral. This is meant to feel like administering emergency care to yourself in the moment things go wrong. Awareness means noticing what you're actually telling yourself under pressure, not what you think you should be telling yourself, not the polished version you'd say out loud, but the real, raw internal commentary running in the background. Most people have never once sat down and transcribed their actual internal monologue during a high-stakes moment. It's usually far more anxious, far more self-focused, and far more repetitive than we'd like to admit. Belief means examining whether that internal commentary is actually true, or whether it's an old, automatic pattern you've never questioned. A thought like, "If I get this wrong, everyone will see I don't belong here," feels true in the moment. It rarely survives calm scrutiny. But almost nobody applies calm scrutiny to it in real time. It just runs, unchallenged, like background software nobody remembers installing. Correction means consciously choosing a different response, shifting from a fear-based, self-protective reaction to an open, purpose-driven one. This is the hardest of the three, because it has to happen fast, often in the middle of the exact moment that triggered the fear in the first place. He walks through this with a simple, clarifying example: someone preparing for a big promotion interview. Under the old, uncorrected pattern, every small stumble in the interview gets amplified into evidence of failure. A fumbled answer becomes proof of incompetence. A pause becomes proof of weakness. And the inner voice spirals, the anxiety compounds, and performance suffers as a direct result of the spiral, not the original stumble. Under the corrected pattern, that exact same stumble becomes just a stumble, noticed, accepted, moved past without narrative attached to it, because the person's focus has shifted from "am I proving my worth right now" to "how can I show what I can genuinely contribute in this role for these people," starting from the next sentence. The skills didn't change between those two versions of the story. The internal operating system did. And that operating system is entirely learnable, according to Sylvester, which is the whole premise of the 7 steps that follow. This is the real engine of the book, 7 interconnected steps, each one addressing a different way ego quietly interferes with how we perform and live. They're designed to build on each other, moving you from your private inner world outward to how you show up for others, and finally to a sense of purpose that outlasts any single outcome. Let's go through what each one is really asking of you, one at a time, because each deserves real attention rather than a passing mention. Step 1 is listen. Are you focused on winning for yourself or winning for others? This is the step most people skip entirely, because it requires being brutally honest about your own motives in the exact moment they're active. Not in hindsight, not in a calm debrief afterward, but live, while the pressure is actually on. Sylvester frames it as a coin flip you make without realizing you're making it. Heads, you're chasing a win-lose outcome that's really about protecting your own image. Tails, you're chasing mastery, genuinely trying to perform at your best, regardless of the immediate scoreboard. Here's why this distinction matters so much more than it sounds like it should. A win-lose mindset ties your entire nervous system to a single outcome. Win and the relief is real but strangely short-lived. Attention flips almost immediately to the next opportunity to win. And the next, because the underlying fear was never actually resolved, just temporarily quieted. Lose, and it isn't just disappointment, it's confirmation of the very thing you feared about yourself all along. That's an exhausting, high-stress way to move through anything that matters to you, and Sylvester's clinical observation, after decades of this work, is that it produces exactly the kind of inconsistency his own early career suffered from. Brilliant one day, flat the next, with no reliable through-line. A mastery mindset works completely differently. The question shifts from "did I win?" to "did I get closer to my best version of this?" That question can be answered honestly and constructively regardless of the final score, which means it doesn't carry the same all-or-nothing emotional weight. Sylvester compares it to an artist working on a piece daily for the pleasure of the work itself, rather than for the applause at the unveiling. The performance becomes more consistent precisely, because it's no longer riding on a single binary outcome every time. The practical test he offers is simple, and worth actually running on yourself before your next high-stakes moment. Notice the sentence running through your head right before it starts. Is it closer to "I've got to win this," or closer to "I'm focused on doing this as well as I possibly can"? They sound almost identical from the outside. Internally, they produce completely different physiological states. Step 2 is smile. What's your real, immediate reaction to your own mistakes? Sylvester frames this one as another coin flip. Hate your errors or accept them. The instinctive reaction most of us have, a flash of self-criticism, a tightening, an internal "why did I do that?" feels like it's protecting our standards. Sylvester's argument is that it's actually the opposite. A harsh reaction to your own mistakes isn't evidence of high standards. It's evidence that your sense of self-worth has become fused with flawless performance, which is an impossible standard that guarantees ongoing suffering, because nobody performs flawlessly ever at anything for long. The mechanism matters here. A single small error met with a spike of self-criticism doesn't stay a single small error. It triggers a cascade. The self-criticism produces tension. Tension degrades the next action. The next action produces another small error. And now you're 2 or 3 mistakes deep in what started as one forgettable slip. Sylvester has watched this exact spiral play out at the highest level of professional sport, where a single dropped chance or missed shot compounds within minutes into a visibly rattled, tentative performer. The pattern is identical in a client meeting, a live presentation, Or a difficult exam, one stumble badly processed becomes 3. People who can genuinely smile at an error aren't lowering their standards or pretending the mistake didn't matter. They're removing the emotional hijack that turns one small mistake into a spiral of several more. The mistake gets processed as information, useful, sometimes even funny, always survivable, rather than as evidence for the prosecution in an ongoing trial about whether they're good enough. That distinction, according to Sylvester, is one of the most reliable markers separating world-class performers from talented people who never quite got there. It isn't that champions make fewer mistakes. It's that a mistake costs them roughly 1 mistake's worth of disruption, rather than 5. Step 3 is time. What are you avoiding, and are you willing to actually look at it? This is the most uncomfortable of the 7 steps, and Sylvester treats it that way deliberately. His argument is that most of us have entire zones of our lives, our work, or our own performance that we quietly steer around, because facing them head-on threatens one of the 2 deep fears directly. We don't examine our worst tendencies too closely because we're afraid of what we'll find. We don't ask for the honest feedback because we're afraid of what it will say. We don't watch the footage back, reread the email chain, or replay the difficult conversation, because some part of us has decided that not knowing feels safer than knowing. The problem, as this step lays out, is that avoidance only feels like safety. It isn't actually safety, it's just fear wearing a disguise, and it comes at a real compounding cost, because whatever you're avoiding doesn't go away. It just stays unexamined, unaddressed, and quietly draining energy every single time it brushes against your attention and gets pushed back down. Practical version of this step is a genuinely useful, slightly uncomfortable exercise. Name, specifically, one conversation you're not having, one piece of feedback you're not asking for, or one part of your own performance you're avoiding looking at closely. Not in general terms specifically. Sylvester's clinical experience suggests that the moment you can name it precisely, you've already done the hardest part, because vague dread is far more paralyzing than a clearly named, specific problem. Step 4 is effort. Does your inside match your outside? This step moves the work from the internal to the external, from what you privately tell yourself to how you actually present to the world, and specifically to the gap between the 2. A lot of us put enormous effort into performing calm, confident, and composed, while internally running on something closer to controlled panic. Sylvester's point is that this gap, between your genuine inner state and your outward presentation, is itself exhausting and destabilizing, on top of whatever the original source of stress was. Maintaining a mask takes energy. It's a second, parallel task running at the same time as whatever you're actually supposed to be doing, and it draws resources away from the primary task exactly when you can least afford to lose them. Real effort, in Sylvester's framework, isn't about getting better at masking what you feel. It's about closing the gap so your insides and outsides are telling the same story, which sometimes means simply, visibly acknowledging the nerves rather than fighting to hide them, and discovering that the acknowledgement itself releases some of the pressure that the hiding was creating. Step 5 is fun. Are you actually enjoying this, or has joy quietly gone missing? This step asks a deceptively simple question, not fun in a trivial, lightweight sense, fun as a genuine diagnostic signal. Sylvester's observation is that joylessness is itself an early warning sign that ego has taken over the controls. When you're gripped by fear of failure, fun is one of the very first things to disappear, and its disappearance quietly signals that you've slipped from a growth-oriented mindset into a pure survival mindset without necessarily noticing the switch happening. This matters because survival mode and peak performance mode are, physiologically and psychologically, close to opposites. Survival mode narrows focus, increases muscular tension, and prioritizes threat avoidance over creative, fluent execution. Reintroducing genuine enjoyment isn't a reward you earn after performing well, Sylvester's argument, drawn from watching this pattern repeatedly at the elite level, is that enjoyment is a precondition that makes good performance more likely in the first place. The performers who look like they're having the most fun under pressure usually aren't in denial about the stakes. They've simply found a way to hold the stakes and the enjoyment simultaneously, rather than treating them as mutually exclusive. Step 6 is give. Are your actions actually oriented toward someone else's benefit? This step turns the earlier idea, winning for others rather than for yourself, into something concrete and testable. It's not abstract generosity or a vague value statement. It's a specific behavioral question. In the last significant thing you did, were you actively using what you know, what you've built, and what you're good at in service of someone else's success? Or were you primarily protecting and advancing your own position? Sylvester is careful to note that giving in this sense isn't self-sacrifice or martyrdom. It's not about disappearing yourself for others' benefit. It's about recognizing that contribution and personal excellence aren't actually in competition with each other, and that orienting your effort outward tends to produce both better outcomes for others and a more stable, less fear-driven experience for yourself, because your sense of worth is no longer entirely dependent on the scoreboard. Step 7 is purpose. What are you serving that's bigger than your own record? The final step is the summit of the whole model. Sylvester's argument is that once you're genuinely operating from a sense of purpose bigger than your own personal ego, the original two deep fears, not being good enough, being rejected, lose most of their grip on you. Not because you stop caring about the outcome, but because your sense of worth is no longer riding entirely on any single result. You can lose and still have served your purpose. You can fall short and still have contributed something real. That reframe doesn't lower the stakes. It changes what the stakes actually are, from prove I'm good enough to did I contribute what I came here to contribute? And the second question, according to 2 decades of Sylvester's direct work with people operating at the very top of their fields, is both a healthier question to live inside of, and paradoxically, the one more likely to produce your best work. It's worth pausing here on something almost everyone has watched happen and wondered about: a performer with a commanding lead who somehow falls apart in the final stretch. The golfer who loses a 4-shot lead on the last few holes. The team that's ahead by a wide margin and somehow lets it slip in the closing minutes. The exam candidate who knew the material cold and blanked the moment the paper was turned over. We tend to explain this as a mental toughness problem. Some people have it under pressure and some don't. Sylvester's 2 decades of direct work with elite performers points to something more specific and, frankly, more useful than that. In his account, this kind of collapse happens precisely at the moment winning stops feeling abstract and starts feeling imminent. And imminent winning triggers an even sharper version of the 2 deep fears than losing does, because now there's something concrete to lose. The commentary shifts from, "Can I do this?" to "I can't blow this." And that shift in framing is enough on its own to produce the tightening, the hesitation, and the uncharacteristic errors that we then narrate afterward as a mysterious collapse. Sylvester has also spent considerable time on what happens after the performing stops entirely: retirement, transition, the end of a defining chapter. His clinical observation is sobering. People whose sense of worth was built entirely on winning for themselves often struggle disproportionately once winning is no longer available as a source of identity. The fear of not being good enough doesn't retire when the person does. Whereas people who built their performance years around purpose and contribution tend to carry that sense of purpose forward far more easily, because it was never tied to a scoreboard that eventually stops existing. This is, in the end, the strongest practical argument in the whole book for choosing winning for others over winning for yourself. It isn't just that it performs better under pressure, though it does. It's that it's the only version of the two that's actually sustainable across an entire career or an entire life. None of this requires an arena, a stadium, or an Olympic final to matter. Every one of the 7 steps is really a diagnostic question you can run on yourself before anything that carries real weight. A presentation, a difficult conversation, a product launch, a performance review, even a hard conversation with someone you love. Am I listening to what I actually want here, mastery, or just protecting my image? Can I smile at whatever goes wrong in the next hour? What am I avoiding facing right now that I already know I'm avoiding? Is my outside matching my inside, or am I burning energy on a mask nobody's asking me to wear? Am I still capable of enjoying this, or has fear quietly swallowed the fun? Am I contributing to someone beyond myself in what I'm about to do? And underneath all of it, what's the purpose here that's bigger than my own personal record? Sylvester's underlying claim, built from decades of direct work with people operating at the highest levels of pressure, is bold but well-earned. The difference between the people who thrive under pressure and the people who crumble usually isn't talent, preparation, or intelligence. It's whether their ego is running the show without their awareness, or whether they've built the self-awareness to notice it, question it, and redirect it awareness, belief, correction, before it hijacks the moment that matters most. The book's real invitation isn't to eliminate ego, because that's not realistic. Everyone has one, Sylvester included, by his own account. It's to stop being unconsciously run by it. That distinction, conscious versus unconscious ego, is the whole game, and it's the difference between a performer who occasionally has a bad day and a performer who's quietly at war with themselves every single time something matters. Let's make this concrete with two scenarios, built to show exactly how these 7 steps play out in ordinary situations most people will recognize. Scenario 1. A mid-level manager is about to present a new project proposal to senior leadership. She's rehearsed it a dozen times. Walking into the room, her internal monologue sounds like this. If this doesn't land, they'll start wondering if I'm actually ready for this level. I can't afford a single stumble. That's step 1 in action, unexamined, a pure win-lose frame, entirely about self-protection. 5 minutes into the presentation, she fumbles a statistic. Under the old pattern, that fumble would trigger a visible flush of embarrassment, a rushed correction, and a noticeably shakier back half of the presentation. Step 2 failed, the error treated as a verdict rather than a blip. Now imagine the corrected version. Walking in, she catches the thought, if this doesn't land, they'll question my readiness, and consciously runs it through awareness, belief, correction. Is that actually true? Would one imperfect presentation genuinely erase months of demonstrated work? Almost certainly not. She corrects the frame. I'm here to show what this project can do for the team, not to prove my worth as a person. That's step 1, done deliberately. When the same statistic fumble happens, it barely registers, a quick natural correction, maybe even a small joke, and she moves on without the cascade. That's step 2, done deliberately. The content of the presentation, the slides, the numbers, identical in both versions. The outcome, quite plausibly, is not. Scenario 2. A student is heading into a final exam that matters enormously to them, for a course they've struggled with all term. Under the unexamined pattern, the internal monologue is dominated by step 3 territory. Everything they've been avoiding all term quietly resurfaces as dread. The study sessions they skipped, the office hours they never attended, the practice problems they left undone because looking at them honestly felt too uncomfortable. That avoided material doesn't just disappear under pressure. It surfaces as a vague, diffuse anxiety that's much harder to manage than any single named gap would have been. The corrected version doesn't erase the underlying gaps. It can't, not at the last minute, but it changes the relationship to them. Naming specifically, I know I'm weak on this particular section and that's the actual risk here, not some vague sense that I'm not a capable student, turns a shapeless fear into a concrete, manageable problem. That's step 3, done deliberately, even under real-time pressure. It won't turn unprepared into prepared. But it reliably turns panic into focus, which is very often the difference between a passing grade and a failing one when the underlying knowledge gap is genuinely borderline. Neither of these scenarios required more talent, more preparation, or more raw courage than the before version. They required the same 7-step lens applied deliberately instead of left running on autopilot. That's the entire promise of the framework, and it's testable. You can run it on your own next high-stakes moment and notice the difference yourself. If you want to actually use this rather than just nod along with it, here's a simple way to build your own version of the ABC plan this week, in under 15 minutes. Start with awareness. Pick one recurring high-pressure situation in your life, a specific type of meeting, a specific relationship, a specific recurring task you dread. Before you next walk into it, write down in your own actual words the exact sentence running through your head in the moments right before it starts. Not the polished version, the raw one. This single act, catching the real sentence rather than the sanitized one, is more revealing than most people expect, and it's the entire foundation the rest of the plan is built on. Move to belief. Look at that sentence and ask, honestly, is this actually true, or is it an old pattern I've never questioned? What would I say to a friend who told me they believed this exact sentence about themselves? Usually the gap between how harshly we judge our own internal narrative and how we'd respond to a friend saying the same thing out loud is enormous, and that gap itself is useful information. Finish with correction. Write one alternative sentence, not a hollow affirmation, but a genuinely truer, more purpose-oriented replacement. Not "I'm amazing and nothing can go wrong," which nobody actually believes under real pressure, but something closer to "my job here is to contribute what I know, not to prove I'm flawless." Keep that sentence somewhere you'll actually see it, and consciously run it in the moments before you walk into the situation you identified. This isn't a one-time fix. Sylvester's own account makes clear this is a practice you return to repeatedly, not a switch you flip once. The 7 steps aren't a checklist you complete and move past. They're a lens you keep picking back up, especially in the moments you're most tempted to put it down. Before we close, a few things this framework is commonly mistaken for, worth explicitly ruling out. This isn't about not caring. Winning for others, having fun under pressure, smiling at your errors, none of it requires lowering your standards or pretending outcomes don't matter. If anything, the people who apply this most successfully tend to care more, not less, about doing genuinely excellent work. What changes isn't the intensity of the caring. It's what the caring is actually anchored to, contribution and mastery, rather than self-protection and image management. This isn't about eliminating ego entirely, and Sylvester is explicit that he doesn't consider that realistic or even desirable. Everyone has an ego. The goal throughout is awareness and conscious redirection, not erasure. A performer with zero self-interest would arguably lack the drive to be there in the first place. The target is a healthy relationship with ego, not its disappearance. And this isn't a one-size-fits-all script you recite. The 7 steps are a set of questions, not a set of answers. 2 people can run the exact same step and land on genuinely different, equally valid corrections, because the underlying work is self-honesty, not compliance with a formula. There's a broader pattern worth naming before we wrap up, because it's easy to hear all of this as advice for isolated high-stakes moments. The interview, the exam, the final, and miss the bigger picture underneath it. Sylvester's clinical experience across decades of work isn't just that unmanaged ego costs you individual performances. It's that it costs you cumulatively, in ways that are easy to miss because they show up as background stress rather than a single dramatic failure. Someone stuck permanently in step 1's win-lose frame doesn't just underperform in big moments. They carry a low-grade version of that same fear into ordinary days, ordinary meetings, ordinary conversations, because the underlying fears of inadequacy and rejection don't switch off outside of designated important moments. They're just quieter the rest of the time, running in the background, adding a tax to everything. This shows up at an organizational level too. Workplaces full of people operating from unmanaged ego tend to develop a particular flavor of dysfunction. People protecting territory instead of collaborating, mistakes getting hidden instead of surfaced and fixed quickly. Feedback becoming rare because both giving and receiving it feels too threatening to the fragile self-image everyone's quietly defending. None of this looks dramatic from the outside. It just looks like an organization that's slower, more brittle, and less honest with itself than it should be, given the talent in the room. Sylvester's experience consulting with executives and teams suggests the fix isn't a new policy or incentive structure. It's the same 7-step lens, applied at scale, until psychological safety and honest error correction become the norm rather than the exception. The inverse is just as real. Teams and individuals who have genuinely internalized winning for others over winning for self tend to produce something that looks, from the outside, almost like ease, not because the work is easy, but because so much less energy is being spent on internal self-protection, leaving far more available for the actual task. That's the compounding return on this work. It's not just better performance in the big moments. It's a quieter, steadier, less exhausting way of moving through all the ordinary moments in between. If there's one thing worth carrying out of all this, it's this. The next time you feel that familiar tightening, that need to prove something, that fear creeping in right before something important, don't just push through it on autopilot. Stop. Actually listen to what you're telling yourself in that exact moment. That's step 1, and according to 2 decades of work with people who have reached the very top of their fields, it's the single step that changes everything downstream from it. Winning for yourself will always feel urgent. Winning for something bigger than yourself is what actually lasts.